welcome to our event tonight, which we're very excited about. So I'm just going to do a brief introduction of my dear friend now. So Chris Nicholson, Christopher Robert Nicholson, he's the author of Who Really Killed Chris Hani, and the reason we are here today. This is not his first work. In fact, he has written and published 8 books to date, as well as short stories and a play. So 2 of his books have been nominated for the Alan Paton Prize, namely Permanent Removal, which is a brilliant book about the Craddock Four, which I'm actually busy reading at the moment and is absolutely brilliant. The other was about Papua Segola, who was a golfer who won the Natal Open twice. On one occasion, dramatically beating the great Gary Player. But Papua was soon banned from playing in tournaments with whites, forcibly moved from his home under the Group Areas Act, and unable to sustain his career because he was the wrong color. Chris started the first non-racial sports club in 1973 called Aurora. Chris has received 2 prizes, one from Edgar Brooks Foundation for being a good chap, for human rights. So, best of all, Chris has a beautiful wife whom he followed to Namibia to win her heart and has 2 daughters and 3 grandchildren. After all these accolades, his real job was that he was a human rights lawyer, and later in his life and career became a High Court judge in 1995. So in fact, you might know him for his Zuma ruling, which if you did your homework, you will see and find out why he was right. He actually ruled against political interference. And that as an honorable judge, you must prosecute without fear or favor. So I'm so delighted to have Chris here tonight. And he has proven without a shadow of a doubt that the saying, "the truth shall set you free," is really true. Our souls have been lifted and our lives have changed completely since Judge Nicholson has published this book and exposed that my father's assassination was not actually a political one, but an economical one. So thank you all for coming tonight, and please do yourself a favor, buy the book, and when you do, read it.
Thank you, Nadia, for those kind words. You know, as she mentioned years ago, I think 20 years ago, I wrote the book Permanent Removal about the Craddock Four, and I'm very pleased to see that the case has now been resurrected. I like to think because of my book, and the culprits are being brought to book, although again they got an adjournment till next year, I saw. But, you know, why did I write a book about Chris Hani? I live in Durban North, which is a much better city than yours. It doesn't rain so much, you know, and it's not so cold. And there's wonderful beaches and surf. But when I drive to work or go anywhere, I come to Chris Hani Highway, which used to be North Coast Road. And having written the book about the Craddock Four 20 years ago, something said to me, "Nicholson, you've got to do something about Chris Hani." You know, the popular narrative is that mad Pole, Janusz Walusz with crazy Nazi blue eyes, shot him, and that he was acting at the behest of Clive Derby Lewis, the Englishman, you know, with the handlebar moustache. But were they the only culprits? Were they puppets? And was there a puppet master or several puppet masters somewhere in the background pulling the strings that finally brought Chris Hani to his very cruel death? And I was gratified to know that Nelson Mandela almost implored me to write a book about it, because in 1998 he was awarded the Chris Hani Award, and he said the following, and I quote, The fateful day of Chris Hani's brutal murder is indelibly etched on the hearts of all freedom-loving people, and no one will be satisfied until the truth about his death is known, unquote, close quotations. And from year to year, the Communist Party has called for a reopening of the Chris Hani case. Nobody seems to be satisfied that the truth was told. You know, it's quite strange. Janusz Wolusz's daughter, Eva, has visited him in South Africa. Now, she is quite a different person to Janusz Wolusz. She's on the left wing. She's a human rights person, and she's come back to take her father back to Poland and try and urge him to mend his ways and you know, lead a proper righteous life. And I'm not sure if she will ever be successful in that, because I was asked the other night, we heard that Eva Wolusz is back in South Africa. Will she ever get him to mend his paths? Somebody said very wittily. Will she get him to go back to Poland and lead a decent life? And I said, you know, I think she won't be able to, because I think they're poles apart. I've got a line here, pause for laughter, by the way. But you know, writing this book was such an adventure. I've spent nearly 10 years researching it in between other matters. But what really put me onto the path of finding a solution to the question I've been putting to you was a circumstance when Janusz Wolusz and Clive Derby-Lewis applied for amnesty from the TRC, remember, presided over by Archbishop Tutu. Mm-hmm. And the person who was digging out the details about Chris Hani's murder was Christelle Terblanche. Her father was Sampie Terblanche, a left-wing economic professor from Stellenbosch. And when she went to the intelligence agencies to find out what information they had about the death of Chris Hani, they gave her a rather slender brown manila file. And in that file were 12 documents. None appeared to have anything to do with Chris Hani's murder. They were 12 documents that dealt with the deaths of Patrice Lumumba, the first Prime Minister of Congo, and Dag Hammarskjöld. I don't know if you know about Dag Hammarskjöld, so for those who don't, he tried to go to the Congo to help with the problems there, and he died in a crash, both in 1960. And these documents were shown to Archbishop Tutu. He held a press conference, talked about the documents, and then the documents disappeared. So little was done about it at the time, but there's a wonderful historian in England called Susan Williams. She wrote a book called A United Kingdom. You may have come across the movie. It's about Seretse Khama marrying a white woman. A lovely movie. Anyway, Susan Williams had written a book called Who Killed Dag Hammarskjöld? And she then got those documents and decided to update her book because of what was revealed in the documents. By the way, on a more prosaic note, I was trying to find out a title for this book. I called it originally Slain Heroes, and then I was coming back from golf. I don't know if this spoils the book completely, but I was coming back from golf and I saw an advertisement at a big billboard. We really sell cars, you know. So it had a little carrot and the really was up on the top. So I thought, now there's a title for a book. Who really killed Chris Hani? So quite prosaic, and I hope it doesn't spoil the magic of it all. But Susan Williams then, in her new book on the updated version of Who Killed Dag Hammarskjöld, she sets out what these documents said. And at the top of the documents was a logo. You know, the masthead of a document? it had a lady clutching what looked like the tail of a horse. And she had a skimpy petticoat on. And Susan Williams starts investigating now. What is this lady with a skimpy petticoat? She realizes that the skimpy petticoat is called a cutty sark. Now, people may know that cutty sarks were famous ships, sailing ships, that left Britain for India to fetch the tea, and they went to Australia to fetch the mutton, etc. And where did these cutty sarks come from? Well, there's a poem by Robert Burns called Tam O'Shanter, and it's about bad boys who go to parties, drink a lot, go home, fall into the company of loose women, and then suddenly they're told in Tam O'Shanter's poem, the horse tells Tam, go home, you've got a faithful wife waiting at home. So off goes Tam, and one of the ladies of ill repute grabs the horse's tail, and that's then the logo of the South African Institute of Maritime Research, because that is the organization that's at the heading or the logo of these documents. Now, these documents then are dealing with the deaths of Patrice Lumumba and Dag Hammarskjöld. And so she starts trying to find out, who is this South African Institute of Maritime Research? Now, Patrice Lumumba, when he became Prime Minister of the Congo, he was trying to redistribute the wealth of the Congo to the people of the Congo and wrench it out of the hands of the corporates who had control at that time. Dag Hammarskjöld was also trying to help Patrice Lumumba in his quest to redistribute the wealth to the people of the Congo. So I'm starting to see patterns now, and I think to myself, right, the South African Institute of Maritime Research, what is it really? And Susan Williams tracks it down to right-wing groups in England, white supremacists, who are anxious that when South Africa becomes independent, and when those other countries became independent, the wealth stays with the big companies they had shares in and doesn't become redistributed to the people. So Susan Williams then looks up what the South African Institute of Maritime Research is, and she finds there's British connections. And you know, 3 weeks after Hani was murdered, a prestigious intelligence magazine published an article. And in that article, they suggested that the South African Institute of Maritime Research was a front for British intelligence. So that they suggested that there were 3 possible candidates for the real killing, or the real culprits for the killing of Chris Hani. And they were military intelligence, they were corporate factor, the corporations, and then possibly rival factions in the ANC. So I started then investigating this South African Institute of Maritime Research, and I started noting patterns. I don't know if you're old enough to remember that at one stage South African forces were involved in trying to topple the socialist Prime Minister of the Seychelles. I don't know if you were alive at that stage or remember it. But again, this SIMAR Institute, the South African Institute of Maritime Research, according to this intelligence report, a front for British intelligence, was involved in the attempt coup of the Seychelles. And then I start investigating other deaths, and I start investigating a Swedish Prime Minister, Olof Palme, killed in the streets of Stockholm. And I investigate Bernd Carlson, who was who was Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations. He was Administrator General of Namibia. He was sent to lead Namibia to independence. He was instituting actions to have returned to Namibia all the wealth that had been taken out of that country in breach of United Nations laws. He had instituted actions in that regard when he was lured onto an aeroplane in London. He was supposed to be, he gave a talk in Brussels, this is Bernd Carlson, and then he left, was supposed to fly from Brussels to London, to New York. But he was persuaded instead to go via London. And once he got to London, he was on a fatal plane flight, Pan Am 103. And Pan Am 103 crashed over Lockerbie. So Bernd Carlson died a fiery death over Lockerbie with 269 others. The actions against the corporations in Namibia ceased. And that brings us on to the next victim that I considered, Anton Lubowski, Nadia's father. He was an advocate in Namibia. He was attempting to redistribute the wealth of Namibia, to take it away from the corporations. And he was murdered on the 12th of September 1989. He was a party to a number of organizations that had as their constitution and as their vision the redistribution of the wealth of Namibia to the people. And so he was gunned down then on that day because it seemed he was in the way of the corporations maintaining their hold on the wealth of Namibia. And in a moment you're going to hear from Nadia about the wonderful project she has instituted in Philippi. You know Philippi, just outside Cape Town. She is starting an early learning center for children there. And if you buy my book, 20% of it will go to this wonderful project. So don't just buy one, buy 2 or 3. I've got a special offer, buy 2 and pay for both, by the way. And it's only 100 shopping days to Christmas, so that aunt you can't think of a present for, there's the book for her. So, why do I think there was a corporate dimension to the killing of Chris Hani? Chris Hani was a fervent believer in the Freedom Charter. I don't know if you've read it lately, but you know it required that, in very idealistic fashion, I must confess, but I think the ANC still profess it to be their founding document, and they all allegedly adhere to it. But it provides for the wealth of the country to be redistributed amongst the population. And I think Chris Hani was one of those people who fervently believed that that should take place. You know, we live in a country that has the most resources on earth, the wealthiest resource country in the world. Way behind and coming second is Russia, which you've probably heard about, and their invasion of Ukraine. But so we have the richest resource company in the world, and what do we have? And this is not me talking, this is the governor of the Reserve Bank. We have the worst Gini coefficient in the world. That is the gap between rich and poor. And which other country has the worst Gini coefficient in the world? Namibia, another mining country. So, if Chris Hani was trying to alter that dimension, that formula, that would have given the corporates a reason to get rid of him. Now, who gave Janusz Walusz the car he drove to kill Chris Hani on the 10th of April 1993? A businessman, Peter Jackson. Now, if you look in the docket, that's the police file of the murder of Chris Hani, and a journalist has looked into that docket. There's an instruction from the security police: do not investigate Peter Jackson. Because he was the corporate element, he was the businessman who supplied the car to Janusz Wolosz on the day he killed Chris Hani. And according to that intelligence report I was telling you, there are a third possible suspect or culprit, and that is factions within the ANC themselves. Because shortly before his death, Chris Hani was asking for increased protection. There were attempts on his life. He was getting death threats on a daily basis. So he asked for more protection from the ANC. And strangely, on the day, the 10th of April, 1993, his security guards were removed from their job to defend him on that particular day. Now, if you want to know more about that, as I do, you look into the internet and you find what I call rather mischievously the Brandy and Coke biographies. What do the old security branch and the intelligence agency officers do when they retire? And they drink their brandy and Coke and then they write their memoirs. And one of them has written a memoir. He calls himself Schickelgruber. His name is I forget, Schulte, J.G. Schulte, but he calls himself Hans Schickelgruber. I was quite amazed by that because Hitler's real name was Schickelgruber, you know. But as you can imagine, Heil Schickelgruber doesn't quite have the same impact as Heil Hitler, so he changed his name from Schickelgruber to Hitler. So what has happened is this man, Schickelgruber, alias J.G. Schulte, or the other way around, has written this book, High Treason. High Treason. What was the high treason? F.W. de Klerk sold out the country to the blacks. That was the high treason. But in that book are messages sent by intelligence agents from the old apartheid regime to their superiors, and there are three of those messages which describe in incredible detail. They make mention of an ANC hit squad called the Omega Strike Force, and nobody knows much about those particular cables or messages, probably because the book is fairly obscure and it was published 24 years ago. But by dint of looking on the internet, I found that book and other books which tell similar facts. So, are we looking here? Have you seen that movie, Murder on the Orient Express? You know there are multiple accused in it. Is it possible that we have multiple accused here? Remember that you're an accomplice to a crime. If you provide a car to Janusz Wolosz, knowing he's going to murder somebody, you are called an accomplice in the law. You are as guilty as the person who fires the shots. If you ensure that on the day in question he has no security guards, in order to enable the murder to take place, you are an accomplice, and you are as guilty as the person who fired the shots. There may even have been a second murderer on the scene, because a lot of the people, do you remember at all that after Janusz Wolosz fired the shots, he drove off and an Afrikaans woman noted his number plate. She reported it to the police, and 15 minutes later Janusz Wolosz was arrested. So all these circumstances then impelled me to write this book and to try and write it. Have I told you too much already? So you won't buy the book. So I'm holding back a lot of fascinating material that you'll want to know. And you'll want to say, is Nicholson talking the truth here? Was this all just blurb? Is this rubbish he's telling us? So I've spoken long enough, and obviously I'll answer any questions you may have, but I visited today the project that Nadia is carrying out at Philippi. And it's a wonderful, wonderful project, and I really applaud it, and I was filled with satisfaction that her father and her mother is here today, and her brother is here, so I'm really grateful that the Lebowski family are here and have given me so much support. But that project in Philippi is such a wonderful project that I'd like to invite her, give her an opportunity to describe to you what she is doing there, because if there's no other reason to buy this book, it's because it will contribute to the plight of those kids in Philippi. And for me, the family said they found closure by reading my book, in that they finally knew who the true culprits were. I think we'd find closure if at last they had justice, if they were dragged before the courts. They all claim the matter is prescribed, time barred, after a certain number of years, you can't bring cases. Murder is an exception to that. Murder never prescribes. You can chase down murderers forever. So, Nadia, the floor is yours.